We sailed on the oceans for more than 20 years. Our intention was initially not to sail around the world. It just happened because we enjoyed the lifestyle. I have often been encouraged to write a book about our adventures, and I have lots of material, both in writing and on film and images. I've even made some decent videos of certain events, such as the Pirate Trilogy, about how our return to the Mediterranean through the Red Sea was interrupted and canceled by the Somali pirates, and we instead sailed around Africa. A route that became 20,000 nautical miles in 2 years longer. Our scorpiosail webpage, which was established already in 1997, contains plenty of stuff. The abundance of sources is one reason I have hesitated, but mainly it is because I feel that there already is enough written about circumnavigations with the theme, "This is how we sailed around the world from point A to point B to CD and so on in chronologic order." Do people really read this kind of books anymore?
Good morning, Sabu Sabu. A big welcome to all the cruising yachts, mariners, and of course all those lurkers. This is Curly, your host, who will endeavour to come to you most mornings, 5 or 6 days a week, maybe 7, at 0830 hours, Sabu Sabu time.
This is sailing.
How should one structure and portray the story of 23 years long journey of 100,000 nautical miles in one's own boat through 100 countries in a way that captivates others? I have often been asked which location was our favorite. The question is impossible, as it would be like comparing apples with oranges or tomatoes with cucumbers. How do you compare Washington, D.C. with Bora Bora? You would have to group the destinations in categories such as our top 10 uninhabited islands, favorite major cities, best wildlife, most interesting historic places, diving highlights, etc., which would make it more interesting and meaningful. You could also try the bucket list method, 100 places a globetrotter should see before she dies. That list could also be divided into groups like famous historical places, such as St. Helena, one of the world's most remote islands, where Napoleon spent his last years, or the wonders of engineering, such as the Panama Canal, or the wonders of nature, such as Galapagos, a unique ecosystem which inspired Darwin to develop the origin of species theory and so on. Several historical persons crossed our path in many parts of the world. In an early stage, we visited the island of San Salvador, where Columbus first set his foot in the New World, although he thought he had arrived in India, and called Guanahani by the natives, and San Salvador on Gomera Island of the Canaries was the place of departure for both Columbus and me on one of our Atlantic crossings. Admiral Nelson is also a person whose tracks I observed several times. Portsmouth, Gibraltar, Sardinia, Antigua to name some. A circumnavigation could also be handled under the theme of destinations in literature, such as in Odysseus's Wake, or To the Center of the Earth, the first in the spirit of Homer and the latter according to Jules Verne. Like when I realized my teenage dream of anchoring my own boat at the foot of Stromboli. It was there from Stromboli's crater that Arne Seknussem's followers returned to the surface of the earth in Jules Verne's novel. In the same waters Odysseus also wandered long before, and in his wake we sailed through the Strait of Messina between Scylla and Charybdis, a bit like in the spirit of the writer and cruiser Göran Schilt. The subject Stromboli would make it possible to include Ingrid Bergman and Woody Guthrie. Donkey bridges are useful, particularly when telling skipper's yarns.
Ingrid Bergman, Ingrid Bergman. Let's go make a picture on the island of Somali. Ingrid Bergman.
Speaking of Schilt, we literally bumped into his yacht Daphne, at this time with a new owner, in Oyster Pond, a bay on the island of St. Martin in the West Indies. Unfortunately, Daphne was sank there by Hurricane Luis, but by then Scorpio was already on the other side of the Atlantic, in Europe. Also, Daphne eventually returned to Finland as a wreck on the deck of a cargo ship and is now on display restored. Of course, the documentation of our sailing saga could be tied together as a collection of serials, with chapters like Castro's Cuba, astronomical thinking during long night watches, Chagos, the Forbidden Archipelago, coup d'etat in Fiji, how to trick an autopilot, reef navigation in the pre-GPS era, uninsured through pirate waters, etc. And I actually have plenty of such skipper's yarns in my desk drawer.
With them windshield wipers slapping time and Bobby Club that drive.
In the form of old travel reports, which in the days before social media were distributed to more or less concerned relatives and friends by regular email. But, and now back to my original question, how on earth do you get all this stuff packaged in a way that interests people in the 2020s? With all respect and admiration for Göran Schilt's stories about the journeys with Daphne, which in the post-war swells went like butter in the sun, but unfortunately such books are hardly bestsellers nowadays. As a child and well into my teens, I devoured so-called boys' books and historical novels, where the action often took place in the wilderness or on the seas. It was about voyages of discovery, history, geography, and excitement, preferably in the Wild West, Sherwood forests, or on Viking ships. I fretted that I had been born 100 years too late. Fun over. Stanley had already found Livingstone. Obviously, favor of the romance of the sea had something to do with genes, which this photo also suggests, and my father had figured in a similar costume 30 years before me. My grandmother's father, Henrik Skog, was for many years captain of Finland's largest steamer, Hermes. He made over 50 trips across the Atlantic, often to South America. Hermes has an exciting history. During World War I, she was sunk in the Arctic Ocean by a German submarine, and the entire crew perished. However, Henrik was lucky enough to be on sick leave before that trip. Even my grandfather could have called himself a ship owner. His timber company in Viborg owned several tugboats and barges, some of which were also used in social contexts. The maritime contagion had also stuck in my father Björn, who in his teens built and competed in his own canoes. As a 14-year-old, he paddled with his best friend Heinz Ram Schmidt from Viborg to Nyslott, partly through the Sima Canal, and the boys are seen here in front of Olofsborg Fortress. Heinz later became a skilled ocean racer and was involved in the founding of boat builder Nautor Swan. But that's another story. Dad also rebuilt an Öland fishing boat for leisure use, and in his big sailboat, I got to know the ports of the cruising club Sjöbjörnarna.
Det satt en mås på en klyvad bom och tom I krävan var kräker.
An event that definitely gave me a taste for long-distance sailing was the trip to Gotland and Öland in the summer of 1973 on my friend Boss's father's cruiser Lara, which Boss got to borrow, and I had the honor of being a guest crew on along with 2 other friends. During the 80s, I then had the opportunity to sail on my own keel in a number of motor and sailboats. And during that time, the archipelagos in the Gulf of Finland were thoroughly explored with my own family as crew. The Mediterranean also came on the menu, and I was part owner of a boat with which we sailed a lot in Greece and Turkey. By this stage, the adventure books had been replaced by more practical literature on how to outfit long-distance boats, live aboard, and travel to all the magical places on the routes around the world. They also had titles like Sail Up and Sail, Escaping from the Hamster Wheel, Cruising Under Sail, etc. I also, of course, read all the biographies written by or about long-distance sailors, starting with Joshua Slocum, who, by the way, during his trip around the world, happened to call at Horta in the Azores exactly 100 years before us, already in June 1895. Other famous names are Eric Hiscock, Robin Noe Johnson, Francis Chichester, Bernard Moy Tessier, Robin Graham, and Tanya Abey, to name a few of the most famous. There seem to be two types of long-distance sailors. Either it is a question of responding to a performance requirement, showing yourself and others that you can do it, often in the form of a competition, or it is a question of a lifestyle. The French single handler Moitessier proved to be a mixture of both categories. He probably would have won the Golden Globe race in 1968, but chose not to cross the finish line and continued for another 3/4 of a lap, because he enjoyed himself so well at sea. The long sailors are, for practical and financial reasons, generally retired. Almost everyone who circumnavigates in the so-called working age does it for a few sabbaticals. The most common timetable for many Finnish and Swedish circumnavigators is 2 to 3 years, and in these cases, you can probably talk about projects, because it will be a hurry. My own plans to embark on some kind of qualified long-distance sailing were still, in the early 1990s, at the level of wishful thinking. At most, I could hope to succeed in planning some kind of early retirement at the age of 55 to 60, and it certainly was a long way to get there. But then something happened that meant I didn't have to wait 25 years for my cruising life. I had accepted the job as CEO of the venerable firm Julius Thalberg, despite warnings that the company's main owner was difficult to deal with. The company had been losing money for many years, but we managed to reverse the trend in a couple of years, despite the simultaneous downturn in the world economy. However, even more radical measures would have been required to make the company clearly profitable. But the owner did not agree with me on the measures, which, on after a long series of fruitless mental arm wrestling, led to my resignation. The adventure at Thalberg was such an unpleasant experience that I decided that I've had enough. I will never again in my life be employed by someone else. The decision has stood. I hadn't even turned 40 at the time, but since then, I've been my own boss. But without the experience at Thalberg, I would hardly have grabbed the opportunity for a long life at sea. Maybe a few years of retirement at most, but as I once answered the question, why didn't you wait until retirement before you cast off? I had no guarantee that I would live long enough to retire, and, even worse, what if at that stage I had lost the desire for cruising the world?
Morgon. Nu är det den 17 maj 1992 och vi har kommit till Naples. Det är inte så dumt att sitta så här vid swimmingpoolen och ta sitt morgonmål. Här i kanalen bredvid så ligger båten och när vi har druckit det färdigt så ska vi gå och se om grejerna är i ordning.
In the years 1979 to 82, Stig Eriksson had been the first Finnish recreational skipper to sail around the world. Now he was living in Florida for most of the year and had decided to sell his boat, a swan ketch, model Noter 43. Eriksson barely managed to complete his lap before Scott Bank with Kenneth Gomberg as skipper finished in the Whitbread race. Much later, it turned out that Alex Heitinen was the first Finn to sail a Finnish-flagged sailboat around the world, but his port of departure had been in Australia. Stigu consoled himself with the fact that he was the first to sail from Finland to Finland. Around the world sailing was still relatively rare in Finland in 1992, only 17 skippers, and of those more than a third in connection with competitions. When we completed our own lap 23 years later, the number was still no greater than 59, which means that on average only 2 boats from Finland per year completed a round-the-world voyage at the time. As crew for the first trip, I had invited 3 old classmates. The journey went from Naples to Miami, where the buddies would disembark and Mala and our children would embark, after which we would continue out toward the Caribbean Sea. The first spot a sailboat, because of the mast height, can get through the Florida Keys is at Marathon. There we parked Scorpio and rented a car to visit legendary Key West by road. So I bought Scorpio in Florida and sold the boat also in Florida, 23 years later. There is an expression that the 2 best days in a boat owner's life are the day he bought the boat and the day he sold it. But what did we experience in between during all these 23 years? First, a few words about the Caribbean Sea. Our first leg with the family was from Miami to Puerto Rico, with a few stops in the Bahamas. In everyday speech, the area between North and South America is called the Caribbean Sea, even though the Bahamas, for example, are not counted there. During our sailings, we spent many years in these waters, in 3 rounds about 10 years apart, visiting practically every island except the Cayman Islands. For most, the sailing experience in the area is limited to the island chain of the Eastern Caribbean, which is now a pure tourist ghetto. We spent long periods in the Western Caribbean, for example, Guatemala, where to shelter for a hurricane season we sailed high up the Rio Dulce, where we parked Scorpio while we made trips in the Central American highlands. As an example of one of the most charming islands in the Eastern Caribbean, I like to mention Anguilla. Here we experience a regatta with traditional local boats, where the race begins with a so-called Le Mans start. Also, the finish line is up on the beach. One of my friends whom I took here on a sailing trip was so delighted that he had a house built on the island. For the next 3 years, we kept our home port in 3 different locations and made trips from there to the nearby islands. Here are some examples of local sailing routes. We spent 3 hurricane seasons in the Caribbean, which isn't very smart, but we were lucky, and then we headed for Europe. In this presentation, I will limit the story of that Atlantic crossing to this photo of Scorpio's icon, painted on the breakwater of Horta on the island of Faial in the Azores. During our entire sailing adventure on Scorpio, we only spent 1 season in Finland, but that summer of 1996 was the coldest I can remember. The following year, we made our way to the Mediterranean Sea, which you reach by rounding Cabo de São Vicente in Portugal at the end and steering towards Gibraltar. The Western Med is not really a sailing paradise because the wind blows either force 10 or it is dead calm. There is, however, a lot to experience there, and as we had already explored Greece and Turkey in a jointly owned boat, we therefore now stuck to the western parts where we, during 3 consecutive years, established home bases in 3 different ports. I'll now skip the obvious and well-known destinations, but here are some less common ones, worth visiting on your own as you can avoid the tourist crowds. An advantage of the Western Med is that it is easy to get over to the exotics of Africa, for instance to Old Carthage in Tunisia, or, as here, from Gibraltar with a possible stopover in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta to Tétouan in Morocco. Here you can, for example, try your hand at carpet trading.
I'm going to replace the same quality, but this one they never was washed. I might give you guarantee for 100 years.
After 3 years in the Mediterranean, it was time to get back to the Caribbean. But first I took the opportunity to celebrate my 50th birthday in the Canary Islands. In my speech, I stated that Columbus had set off from the same port here on Gomera just over 500 years earlier. For him, the maps ran out shortly after departure, while we have charts all over the world and are equipped with satellite navigation. Even so, the future on a personal level was as uncertain for me as it was for Columbus. But unlike him, I have to content myself with discovering places that are new only for myself. In return, I will discover something else. Expanded perspectives and personal renewal, which cannot happen to the same degree if you stay in the ingrained patterns. The sailing itself is not the most important thing, although an essential part, but the lifestyle. We were constantly on the way, but had already arrived at the destination, at home and on a journey at the same time. Early on, when I was asked why we chose this life, I used to answer, at first jokingly, that I wanted to get away from the guardianship that prevails in today's welfare society and take responsibility for my own life. Later, I said it in all seriousness. If I want to use a helmet when I ride a bike, a life jacket when I paddle a canoe, or knee pads when I pick mushrooms, it must be based on my common sense deeming it justified, not because of compulsion. I realize that there are many who think that this kind of society is safe and worth striving for, but I have always had a tendency to seek out tricky situations. It is incredibly rewarding when you can grow with the task at some point and can manage on your own from situations that require skills that you basically did not possess before.
Och varför gör vi så här då? Ja, för det kommer vatten in någonstans här. Så nu måste vi söndra skåpen och så vi ser var det kommer vatten in. This is sailing.
3 weeks after we left Gomera, we anchored off Barbados and continued to retrace our track 8 years earlier. This time, we wanted to avoid the hurricane season in the West Indies and continued towards the east coast of the USA. The insurance companies assume that you stay north of Florida.
Det var en ganska dimmig morgon här och lite försenade i starterna fortfarande, så det kommer det in en dimsjok här och där.
The Intracoastal Waterway, or ICW, is a 1,000-mile-long waterway protected from the Great Ocean that stretches from Miami in the south to Norfolk in the Chesapeake Bay. It consists of a combination of man-made canals and natural waterways, such as rivers, lakes, and estuaries. For the most part, it runs on mirror-like water surfaces just inside, with visual contact with the mighty swells of the open Atlantic. The ICW meanders through metropolises of Florida and Georgia, as well as charming small-town America in the Carolinas and Virginia, also through vast wildernesses with abundant wildlife. You can anchor overnight in the noise of the big city near North America's largest mill, or in complete silence, or use one of the numerous marinas. Here, Scorpio is docked in downtown Savannah, Georgia, and here in central WDC. We made friends with many Americans and were sometimes lucky enough to tie up at someone's dock, like here in Marathon.
På framnäsgränden så kan man störa grannens gräsklippare, men här är lite andra grejer.
It does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
My God.
That looks like a second plane.
On September 11th, 2001, we happened to be in Norfolk, home of the world's largest war fleet. The commotion was palpable, and as we navigated through the huge harbor with our foreign flag in the stern, we received more attention than we were used to.
George Washington. Och den där hette Theodore Roosevelt. Det här är inte mycket av det här.
The experiences in ICW are among the nicest and most interesting parts of our round-the-world voyage. During these 3 years, we had the opportunity to experience American society from the inside. For example, a clip from the presidential election between George Bush and John Kerry. The ICW stretches over 1,000 nautical miles, and on Scorpio, we ran them all. However, not at the same time in one stretch. That would take too long. When the weather permits, you take the opportunity to do longer stretches on the outside whenever possible, as shown on this map. A jump with one or more overnight stages saves several days on the inside. However, conditions in the inlets are often very difficult due to the weather and constantly shifting sandbars. Also, the Bahama Islands became familiar over the years, often on our way to or from destinations on the north or south side. But several times we made tours with the Bahamas itself as our destination. The Bahamas has many faces. You can choose between casinos in Nassau or exploring down drug lord plains on the outlying islands. or swim with the pigs.
Tror det eller inte, men det här är Bay of the Pigs.
And if you have guests short on time, you can take the flight directly to the boat.
Det är bra att han kan sikta den där killen. Tänk om man skulle lite hosta till.
Even our sailing trips in the Bahamas could fill many books, but who cares? Before we leave the Caribbean, I could mention two special but different places, which can be experienced in a very special way by getting there with your own boat on the side of the tourist currents. The Blue Hole in Belize is a hole over 100 meters deep in the middle of an otherwise shallow area. It was tricky to reach in a boat with a keel of just under 2 meters. The diving inside was breathtaking. We experienced Cuba during Castro's time for 4 months in 2 turns, completely on our own roads and without poly trucks. Days in stunning surroundings and velvety dark nights filled with political meditations, superb rum and cigars and divine music. Before we left the Caribbean Sea, on the way between Cartagena in Colombia and the Panama Canal, we took the opportunity to visit yet another place, which is difficult to genuinely experience in any other way than by own boat, namely the autonomous Kuna community in the province of San Blas. That too would be worth its own chapter. Here Scorpio's anchor chain is seen when we are in a place which the sailors aptly call the swimming pool. The Indians are certainly business-minded. These ladies wanted $1 per photograph. Real estate works differently than with us. The centers of the islands are the most valuable and the beaches worthless. Therefore, the toilets are kept on the beaches where there is by all means better flushing. On some old charts, some are even marked as native toilet. This is what our tracks in the Caribbean Sea looked like when we moved over to the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean occupies almost half of the Earth's surface. It is therefore best to describe this area using Mercator's projection. Dramaturgically, our arrival in the Pacific already began at the mouth of the Panama Canal on the Caribbean side, in the city of Cologne, both physically and mentally. Not before the canal was completed did it become definitively clear that our journey would culminate in a round-the-world voyage. After Panama, there was no turning back. The most natural, though not shortest, route back to Europe was west. I have described the canal transit in a separate film. It took us 4 years to clear the Pacific Ocean. In that time, most people sail around the world, but then they are probably forced to skip New Zealand or Australia, usually both. I now skip the most famous places such as Tahiti, Moorea, Bora Bora, Tonga, and Fiji, and mention only a few gems. Vanuatu was a real gem, which is accompanied here by the group Slave Boys. The language was incomprehensible at first, even though it sounded like English. But when you saw it written, everything was as clear as a hot dog. In the capital, Port Vila, you could update yourself on the internet with your favorite beverage. Cheers to that. Suwarrow is an uninhabited atoll that became famous after the hermit Tom Neal lived there for 17 years and wrote a book about it. You can only get here with your own boat. 500 nautical miles to the west lies Saguaro's closest neighbor, Samoa, where we visited author Robert Louis Stevenson's home, which is now a museum. The Galapagos cannot be left unmentioned in a tale of the South Seas. Normally, passing boats were only allowed to stay for 72 hours and anchor in only one of 3 ports. We had visited the Ministry of Marine in the capital Quito and received permission to stay for 2 months and move completely freely anywhere in the entire archipelago. Here I'm inspecting the famous post office box at Post Office Bay on the island of Floriana. In New Zealand, we spend 1.5 years, which are described on 2 DVDs. In the Pacific, we also found our favorite among uninhabited islands, Chesterfield Reef in New Caledonia.
Hejsan! Ja, det är den 16 november år 2008. Vi är här på Chesterfield Reef i norra New Caledonia. Det är inget trängsel här utom att det är fåglar och vi. Scorpio är parkerad där i bakgrunden. Det är ganska långt härifrån till civilisationen. Australien är 5 dagar åt det här hållet och Vanuatu är 6 dagar åt det här hållet. Förutom att ölet håller på att ta slut så går det ingen nöd på oss här. Livet ler, vad annat kan man göra?
Here, Scorpio anchors in the front row at Sydney to view the New Year's Eve fireworks. After leaving Australia to port, those in a hurry set course for South Africa, but we again chose a route that would be 4 years longer than the usual one. We started with a few months among the Spice Islands of Indonesia. Those adventures are more closely described on 2 DVDs, but again we here have to settle for just scratching the surface. In Borneo, we rented a riverboat and set off to meet the orangutans in company with our American friends Julia and Horst.
The day was fabulous, one of the best days of my life, I think. Orangutans, walked with them, talked to them, touched them, saw the lady next to me attacked by one. It was a good day.
In Singapore, we were welcomed by old friend Holger, who happened to be the EU ambassador in the country. Good timing indeed. The stay in Thailand was extended to 2 years after our first attempt to sail to the Mediterranean was interrupted by the pirates. James Bond Island was again an example of the advantage of having your own boat. During the day, the place was packed with tourists, but in the evening, we had the uninhabited island all to ourselves. With a little imagination, however, we got company.
Bonjour, Monsieur Bond. I am Nicknap.
We also took the opportunity to make extensive round trips to Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and northern Thailand. Here I content myself with only referring to the headings in my contemporary blog reports. We gradually began to prepare for life after sailing, and the time in Thailand and Malaysia was used for extensive maintenance and development work. But then,
If you are attacked, there is no guarantee a warship can come to your aid.
suddenly we found ourselves on a small atoll in the Maldives with a big problem. We decided to return to Thailand for a fresh start. The globe at that stage seemed like a small ball, or orange, on which alternative courses could be drawn. It's easy to make fun of yourself in retrospect, But right then, it was a matter of bloody seriousness. We had planned to sail to the Mediterranean by the shortest route, sell the boat, and buy a house in Italy, where we had already scanned the market. The escalating pirate situation thus meant a change for the rest of our lives. Positive consequences include several months in the Maldives and visits to the forbidden Chagos archipelago, where we managed to get a permit.
Most people have never even heard of Chagos Islands. The uninhabited coral islands are as close to paradise on earth as you can get. Problem is, you are forbidden to go there, and there is no way to get there unless you provide for transportation yourself.
And in Sri Lanka, where we were met by Finland's pizza emperor, Ravi Grönblom, who guided us to the phenomenal Sigiriya, the Lion Rock. On the positive side, we of course also have South Africa, Namibia, St. Helena, Ascension, and Brazil. And the list of countries visited was also expanded to include Madagascar and Mozambique. Someone might wonder why you have to go via the Americas to get to the Mediterranean. This depends on prevailing wind and current patterns. "17 years after we left Finland, we completed our circumnavigation. That same night, we had one of the worst incidents of the entire lap. We had a fire in the engine room, which could have ended in disaster. The next day, we raised Scorpio for repairs in Trinidad, and this led to the decision to shelve the Mediterranean plans and instead sail to Florida, which is probably the best marketplace for boat sales. For the third time, we sailed through the West Indies, 20 years after our first visit. Little did I know then that I would reach the retirement age of 63 on the island of Bikia in the Republic of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and even less that what I was about to retire from was actually long-distance sailing.